My stepmother set her mug of tea down and folded her hands the way she always did before a rehearsed speech. Dominic's bringing Phoebe and her boys to live in the house, Carol Hartwell said. You'll need to find somewhere else by the end of the month. Then she reached for the word she'd been saving for years. Freeloader. You've always been a freeloader, Naomi. Now, let me back up. I'm Naomi Hartwell. That morning I was sitting at the breakfast bar in a kitchen with maple cabinets I'd refinished myself 2 summers earlier, holding a mug that had already gone cold. Carol always brought the same tone into that kitchen. Calm, certain, like she was reading from a script only she could see. And I never thought much of it. Until the morning she told me to pack. Here's what she didn't know. What none of them had bothered to ask in 4 years of watching me hand her a monthly envelope of cash. The house was mine. Legally. On a deed with Alberta land records that carried one name. And it wasn't hers. Let me tell you how this started. My mother, Margaret Hartwell, died when I was 9. My father, Walter, remarried 4 years later to Carol, who came with a son 2 years older than me, Dominic Voss. From the day Carol moved in, the house reorganized itself around him the way a room reorganizes itself around whoever's loudest in it. He got the bigger bedroom. He got hockey camp every summer. When university came, Walter and Carol paid Dominic's tuition in full. When my turn came, I was told money was tight. The same year Carol got a new car for her birthday. I worked through my whole degree. 2 jobs most semesters. I came out the other side with $31,000 in debt, and a job at a downtown investment firm a year later. The kind of place where you build a book of clients one unglamorous year at a time. I was good at it. The kind of good that surprised people who'd spent my whole childhood deciding I wasn't the talented one. My father's stroke happened on a Tuesday in March, 4 years before that morning in the kitchen. Carol said she couldn't cut her hours at the dental office. Dominic said his job in commercial real estate was at a critical stage. So I moved back into my childhood bedroom. I paid for half the groceries. I covered the gap when Dad's disability checks didn't stretch to his physio copays. I repainted a bathroom, fixed a fence, paid a property tax bill outright the year Carol's hours got cut, because otherwise the county would have put a lien on the house. None of it was ever acknowledged. What was acknowledged often was how convenient it must be for me, a grown woman with a finance degree, living at home without real responsibilities. I finished that cold coffee anyway. Some part of me needed those last 30 seconds of normal before everything shifted. Then I went upstairs, packed 2 suitcases, and came back down to find my father in the den. He didn't get up. Naomi, he said, just let me handle this. I told him I loved him. I told him it would be fine. I checked into a hotel off the highway that night and lay on top of the comforter a long time, doing arithmetic that had nothing to do with money. I didn't call anyone. I let it sit. What happened 18 months before that morning is the part Carol never knew to ask about. My father asked me to drive him somewhere private. In the slow, careful way he'd spoken since the stroke, he told me the house was in trouble. A home equity line he'd taken out for his brother's failed restaurant venture. Missed payments. A foreclosure notice sitting in a drawer Carol never opened. Carol would panic, he said. Dominic would just tell me to sell it and split whatever's left. He wasn't wrong about that. I'd been in finance 9 years by then. I knew exactly what to do. I sat down with the bank, restructured the payoff, and covered the rest using an inheritance my grandmother, Eleanor Whitfield, had left me years earlier. Money I'd kept untouched in an account for exactly a moment like this one. She used to tell me, back when I was small enough to sit on her kitchen counter while she balanced her checkbook by hand, that a woman should always keep something nobody else knows about. Not out of secrecy, out of readiness. I didn't understand it then. I understood it completely in that Tim Hortons parking lot, watching my father's hand shake as he signed the transfer papers our lawyer had drawn up. The house went into my name. Fully. Legally. Registered. It wasn't a trick. It was a man protecting the one thing his first wife had picked out 30 years earlier. Handing it to the one person he trusted to keep it standing. For a while after that, things got easier. Carol was warmer that spring than she'd been in years. She started leaving me the good coffee, the kind she usually kept for guests. She said more than once that she didn't know what she'd do without me around. I let myself believe it meant something had changed between us. That's the part that still gets me. Not the freeloader comment. The good coffee. I know that feeling. When someone finally treats you the way you'd always hoped they would, and you let your guard all the way down because you're so tired of holding it up. I didn't know then that the warmth had nothing to do with me changing anything. It was just Carol, unaware she was living in a house that already belonged to someone else, feeling generous with what she thought was hers to give. I kept using that same cold coffee mug every morning that whole year. The one with the hairline crack near the handle that I never got around to replacing. It sat on the counter through all of it. The good spring, the freeloader morning, everything after. I didn't know yet how much that mug would end up meaning to me. The call came at 6 the next morning, which in late October means it's still pitch dark outside. It was my father, and his voice had none of the flatness it usually carried since the stroke. "Carol's looking for the boys' old soccer trophies in the filing cabinet," he said. "She found the property documents instead. Naomi, she found the deed." I sat up in the hotel bed and looked at the dark window. "It's not a mistake, Dad," I said quietly. "You know it's not a mistake." A long pause. Long enough that I checked the call timer to make sure it hadn't dropped. "I know," he said, and something in his voice sounded almost relieved to finally say it out loud. "I've known for 18 months. I just didn't know how to tell her." Carol called 40 minutes later. She didn't say hello. She said there had clearly been a clerical error. That no lawyer in good conscience would let this happen. That I must have manipulated my father during a vulnerable period. Taken advantage of a sick man who didn't know what he was signing. She used the word manipulative 4 times in about 90 seconds. She did not use the word freeloader again. That told me something had already started shifting. I let her finish. I'd had 21 years of practice waiting out Carol's storms. "The house is mine, Carol," I said once she stopped to breathe. "It has been for a year and a half. Dad came to me because the bank was 6 months from starting foreclosure, and neither of you told anyone. I paid off the line of credit with my own savings. I have the deed. I have the lawyer's documentation. There is nothing to discuss because nothing was done wrong." The silence on her end lasted longer than everything she'd said before it, combined. Over the next few days, the family network did what family networks do. My aunt, Reina Delgado, called to suggest that property matters should be handled with more flexibility, more grace, perhaps a longer transition period, for everyone's sake. I listened. I stayed calm. I explained the same facts again, and let the silence on her end speak for itself. Dominic called on day 3. His approach was different. Dominic had spent his whole life relying on charm the way other people rely on facts. He opened with sympathy, said he was sorry Carol had been harsh, that it wasn't fair to me. Then, smooth as anything, he pivoted. Phoebe. The boys. The lease that had fallen through. How much more flexible my life was, as a single woman with a stable income, compared to a man trying to build a family. He floated the idea that maybe I could just let them stay while I found my own place. "Temporary," he said. "Just temporary." "Dominic," I said once he'd finished, "you're asking me to move out of my own house so you can move into it. I need you to actually hear yourself say that out loud." He didn't have anything to say to that. It struck me, sitting in that hotel room, that nobody in that family had ever once been asked to hear themselves clearly. It had made every one of them remarkably bad at recognizing their own unfairness when it was finally handed back to them. I went back to the house on the 5th day. Not to fight. Not to make a scene. Because it was mine, and I was done pretending otherwise out of politeness. Carol was at the kitchen table when I walked in. She looked smaller than she had 5 days earlier. The way people sometimes do once the architecture they've built their whole identity on turns out to be standing on someone else's foundation. My father sat beside her, his weak hand resting flat on the table. Neither of them spoke first, so I did. I told them I had no intention of putting either of them out. I told them Dominic and his family were welcome to visit, to come for dinners, to be part of our lives. But they would not be moving in, because the decision of who lived in that house now rested with me, and no one else in that room. Carol started crying. I'd seen her cry before. The performative kind. The redirect that made her the injured party before anyone could finish holding her accountable. This wasn't that. This was something closer to the sound of 30 years of assumptions cracking apart at once. I felt no triumph watching it. I felt tired. A little sad. And underneath those things, something steadier than either. The plain, unglamorous feeling of finally standing on ground that was legally, permanently mine. I laid out 2 conditions before I left that afternoon. First, the word freeloader was never to be used about me again, in that house or anywhere else, by anyone. Second, every contribution I'd made over 4 years, the groceries, the physio copays, the fence, the bathroom, the property taxes, the foreclosure I'd quietly stopped, needed to be spoken out loud. Not repaid. Just recognized as real. My father agreed before I'd finished the sentence. Carol took 5 days. Then she came to my office downtown, sat across from my desk looking smaller and older than I'd ever seen her, and said the words. It wasn't warm. It didn't erase 21 years. But it was something true, after a long stretch of things that weren't. Dominic and Phoebe found a rental in Airdrie within the month, closer to the boys' school anyway, which Phoebe later admitted she'd wanted from the start. I repainted the front hallway a deep forest green that Carol had vetoed every single time I'd suggested it over the years. Nobody said a word against it this time. My father's speech has gotten steadier, with more time and more physio. Some mornings now he makes it almost the whole way through a sentence without needing help finishing it. I still make coffee in that kitchen every day before work. Some mornings I let it go cold on the counter, just so I can sit there a minute longer. The mug is still cracked near the handle. I never got around to replacing it. I think about my grandmother sometimes, standing at her own counter, telling a 9-year-old that a woman should always keep something nobody else knows about. Not out of secrecy, out of readiness. I understand it completely now. Being patient with people is not the same as letting them decide who you are. I learned the difference standing in a hotel room in the dark, doing arithmetic that had nothing to do with money. If you've ever given everything to a family that only noticed you when they needed something, tell me in the comments. What did it take for you to finally stand your ground?